The 2025 NFL schedule has officially dropped, and some people think the Raiders kind of got screwed with the schedule, which we'll talk about in this video. I don't 100% agree with him, but I do understand what some people are saying. Either way, man, we got the official schedule out there, and I'm excited to kind of talk about this. You know, we already knew the teams that we were going to play, but we didn't really know when we would play those teams, right? Are we going to have back-to-back East Coast games? Are we going to have 2 or 3 weeks straight where we're at home or potentially on the road? A lot of those things are not known, right? But you know your opponents, generally speaking. So the regular season schedule has officially dropped today. Let me just back this up really quickly. The preseason schedule has also dropped. We don't have the actual dates, but we do know that in the first preseason game, we'll be playing the Seattle Seahawks. In the second one, we'll be playing the 49ers. And then in the final one, we'll be playing the Arizona Cardinals. Now, I don't really know how the Raiders are going to handle preseason because it's usually different depending on the regime. Josh McDaniels at one point had Josh Jacobs, and I think the year before that, even Maxx Crosby playing in the preseason. Other teams don't even put their players in, right? And I understand why you don't play some of your players. I think it makes sense, but I understand if you don't go forward with that same strategy. Pete Carroll, historically speaking, or I should say more recently speaking, has not played his starters in the preseason. So it will be interesting to see if the Raiders take the approach where they do put their starters in. Either way, it will be interesting. And if they do, which week? Is it going to be the Seahawks game? Is it going to be the 49ers game? Most likely the week the Raiders put their starters in, the other team will probably put their starters in as well. So we'll see what ends up happening, right? But do keep in mind, Pete Carroll was in this division, right? So he's going to play 3 teams he's played in the past in the preseason. But preseason doesn't matter, right? No one cares. Let's just be honest. The regular season is where things kind of get interesting. Now, the Raiders this season in their 17 games will have 3 games officially, like already official in terms of primetime games, right? So the Raiders, just to start this off in the second week of the season, this is going to be the Raiders home opener against the Los Angeles Chargers. This one will be a Monday Night Football game broadcasted on ESPN. They'll have 2 others as well. They'll have a Week 10 matchup against the Denver Broncos. This will be in Denver. This will be a Thursday night game. And then the week after that Denver game, you'll have the Dallas Cowboys, and that'll be a Monday Night Football game. So the Raiders will have 3 primetime games, 2 Monday night, 1 Thursday night. And also keep in mind, week 17 and 18, it is to be determined at this point. So there is a chance we get like a Saturday game as well, right? So it could technically be a primetime game. Maybe it's like a Saturday night or potentially a Sunday night game. So there's upside for the Raiders to have up to 5 primetime games this season. But we'll see at least the Raiders 3 times on primetime, which doesn't really matter, right? We're going to watch the games anyways. But let's talk about the schedule, man, because some people do think the Raiders are kind of getting screwed, specifically with the travel that they have to do before the bye week. And I definitely understand what some people are saying. You know, the first game of the season, the Raiders are going to be playing the New England Patriots. This is going to be September 7th, the first game of the season. This will be the home opener for the Patriots. The Raiders have traveled to basically the other side of the country, right? You got to go all the way out there towards Boston. And right after that game, right, September 7th, the Raiders will fly back. And then they'll play the Chargers at home on Monday Night Football. But then the following week, then they got to go all the way back to Washington, right? So some people are saying, hey, that's kind of tough. And then to make it even more difficult, then, 2 weeks later, you got the Indianapolis Colts. That's going to be in Indianapolis. And some people are saying, hey, that 5-week stretch, there's a lot of going back and forth, right? And some people are like, that's going to be kind of difficult, right? Because we know how it's like, if you've ever been from the West Coast to the East Coast, and I'm sure it's the same thing if you're from the East and you come to the West, it's hard, man. That 3-hour difference definitely makes a huge difference. And historically speaking, the Raiders haven't done well when we have to travel to the other side. And West Coast teams generally do struggle going to the East, right? It's kind of the thing that generally happens. But I will say this, I don't think the Patriots are that great of a football team. I understand they have Drake May and they have a lot of expectations. They have some young, talented players as well. One of the best young wide receiver or rookie prospects, I should say, in Kyle Williams. Some of you guys know the reference to that. I don't think the New England Patriots are in a position where, for the Raiders, the team that you should be losing to the New England Patriots. Right? I think the Raiders are a better team, right? And Drake May, although he was, showed some upside last year, he's still a second-year player. He's still going to have some struggles, right? This is that year for him to kind of start to figure it out and put it together. But with that, I expect the Raiders to come out here and beat the New England Patriots. And then you have your home opener essentially against the Chargers. That should be a winnable game as well, right? I don't think the Chargers are that good of a team. I've always said that I think Justin Herbert's a great quarterback with so much upside. I kind of take that back a little bit. I don't think he's as great as what some people think, right? I almost feel like there's certain guys out there that are a little bit more overhyped than they are kind of good, right? Guys like Justin Herbert, for example, I think Trevor Lawrence kind of fits that same category. I think those guys are a little overhyped, right? They're not as good as what people kind of perceive them as. To me, those are winnable games, right? Those first two games. Even the Washington Commanders. I understand what the Commanders did last season. I totally understand that they took a rookie quarterback and they went all the way to the championship game. But we've seen coaches have success in the first year to fall off in the second year, right? We've seen coaches be really, really, really good in 1 year and then kind of fall off the following year, right? We saw this literally with the Washington Commanders offensive coordinator, right? We saw Cliff Kingsbury have so much success early on, and then the Cardinals kind of start to struggle a little bit on the offensive side, right? At some point, teams are going to figure it out, right? And they're going to shut it down. And I doubt that the Washington Commanders are going to be as good this year as they were last year. I think there's going to be some regression that's going to happen. It generally does happen with quarterbacks, right? We saw CJ Stroud kind of go through it this past season. I think that's a winnable game for the Raiders as well, right? I think it's a 100% winnable game. The Chicago Bears also obviously have a second-year quarterback in Caleb Williams, and this one will be at home for the Raiders. Winnable game. Although there's a lot of traveling, right? Because even then in week 5, you got to go all the way to Indianapolis. I understand it's difficult to make that travel, but you're also benefiting almost from, early on in the season, you're traveling every other week, right, to the East Coast. That's almost beneficial for the Raiders because, you can win if you're traveling, for example, to the East Coast 4 times, right? And the Chiefs aren't necessarily on the East Coast, but you're traveling 4 times in those first 7 games. That's almost beneficial. If you can come out of that 4 and 3 or 5 and 2 potentially, you're in a really, really, really good spot. I think this season the Raiders are going to be a much better team, but more than being a better team, I feel like there's not any team on this schedule other than obviously the Chiefs, but the Chiefs are in our own division. I don't feel like there's anyone other than the Eagles where I feel like, hey, the Raiders can't beat this team. Right. And it's not that we can't beat the Eagles, right? What I mean by that is, there's some teams at the top, like the Eagles, the Bills, the Ravens. Chiefs don't count for us as much because it's a divisional game, but those 4 or 5 teams dominate, right? And they're usually going to win 12, 13, 14 games a season. There's no team like that really on our schedule other than the Eagles where you're like, this is not a winnable game, right? In fact, there's a lot of games where I could see the Raiders actually being favorites. Just in these first 7 games, obviously we will not be favorites in that Chiefs game. But other than that, what other game will we not be the favorites? Maybe the Commanders, but even then, I think that's going to be very, very close. I do think the first 7 weeks are going to be a lot tougher than the back end of the schedule. But I do expect the Raiders to win a lot of these games, to be honest with you guys. I don't think there's that big of a difference between the Commanders and what the Raiders team looks like this upcoming season. Especially with Pete Carroll as our head coach, I think the Raiders can be a lot better. Now, worst case scenario, right? You lose to the Patriots, you lose to the Chargers, you lose to the Commanders, you beat the Bears, you beat the Colts, you beat the Titans, you lose to the Chiefs. You're 3 and 4, but the season doesn't end at that point, right? That's worst case scenario. Because you will have a bye week for week 8. And from October 19th, right, that game against the Chiefs, up until the Jags, that's multiple games off. And one of the interesting things right after that bye is you will have that game against the Jags where you have a bunch of time off. And then you do play again 4 days later, right? You'll play Sunday on November 2nd, and then you have to play on Thursday Night Football. And that kind of sucks for the Raiders. But the one benefit will be that, you'll essentially have 14 days off right before that, tough 2-game stretch. And then another benefit you're going to get is after that Thursday Night Football game, you're then going to play on Monday Night Football the following week, and you have a ton of days off. Between the Broncos and Cowboys game, look at how many days you get off. From November 6th to November 17th, that's 11, 12 days right there, right? So that's going to benefit the Raiders a ton, right? So you'll have that 2 tough games after your bye, or you have 2 tough games, but you do have a bye before that, and then you get a bunch of days off to kind of rest and relax and kind of get ready for that Monday Night Football game. It's almost like a mini bye in itself, right? If you really think about it. But from that point forward, you'll have a normal schedule as you kind of go forward. And I don't think a lot of these teams are really that good, to be honest with you guys. Right now, I shouldn't say really that good. They're good teams, right? Like the Cowboys are a good football team. But the Raiders can beat the Cowboys, right? The Cowboys are in cap hell, right? And they've struggled to go out there and spend and get those playmakers. And I know they traded for George Pickens. By November 17th, Pickens might not even be playing for the Cowboys, right? There's a chance he's already sitting out by then. Who knows? Uh, so I think that's a winnable game. The Cleveland Browns, I think, are obviously a mess, right? They don't really have a quarterback. The Chargers, this one will be at home for the Raiders. The Broncos, I mean, those honestly, right after a bye, the next 6 games are all winnable games, right? The Jags, yeah, they're a good football team, but that's winnable. Broncos will be a winnable game, although it will be in Denver, which does make it a little bit harder. But a lot of these games, man, are winnable. And then you'll have that game against the Eagles. And, I'll be the first to say, guys, obviously the Eagles right now are one of the best teams. They're the Super Bowl winners from last season. That's going to be a game where, if the Raiders are like, say like 8-4 going into that Eagles game, right? If we do have a really good schedule, that's going to be a really, really, really fun game, right? That Eagles game is going to be really, really fun. It'll be in Philly, but I bet I know there's a lot of Raider fans in the Philly area, right? Specifically around Philly, Pittsburgh, and that area, generally speaking. And that's going to be a very, very fun game if the Raiders are what I think they will be this season. And then you'll have the Texans, you have the Giants, and you have the Chiefs. And that final game against the Chiefs will be at home, which is, once again, beneficial for the Raiders, right? Especially if that Week 18 game comes down to it. There's a couple things that could happen. The Chiefs might already have clinched the number 1 seed. They might bench their starters and then basically give the Raiders a free win, which I'm pretty sure they did this past season for the Broncos as well, right? They allowed the Broncos to win, which I think got them into the playoffs. Or it could have potentially gotten, or may have been the Chargers that basically got the free win. So either the Chiefs are going to already have clinched the number 1 seed, or that's going to be the number 1 seed in terms of our division. And, once again, that could be a massive game for the Raiders. I look at this entire schedule, and I know some people are going to disagree with me because, I get it, right? For years, things have kind of looked good on paper, and then you got to go out there and put it on tape. And we never do, right? We always kind of struggle. But this Raiders team, I would make the argument, this is the best Raiders team, and like the general direction that we're on right now, this is the best I've seen the Raiders in 10 or 15 years, right? Realistically, right? The only other year that I think would come close to this would be like 2016, 2017. I think that direction that the Raiders were on was a really, really good direction. And obviously, we made a couple of mistakes. Our 2016, we fired I believe it was our offense coordinator at that time. That kind of sent us downhill in 2017. You fired the coaching staff at that point, and then you go into 2018 with Gruden, who then starts this rebuild. 2016-17 was the best direction I had seen the Raiders probably ever since I've been watching them since the early 2000s, right? To me, I think what the Raiders are right now is probably the best direction we're on. And more than that, the team that we kind of have in there right now, if the offensive line ends up, if Caleb Rogers ends up being a good rookie guard, right? He doesn't have to be a top 5 guard. If he just ends up being a top 30 guard in the NFL, if he slots in at, let's say, left guard, and let's say DJ Glaze ends up being a good right tackle, the Raiders have a good offensive line, and we have the weapons this year. We have the quarterback this year. We have that elite defensive line. There's nothing stopping the Raiders from winning, 10, 11, 12 games this season. A best case scenario, if I'm the Raiders, and let's say we are a really, really good team, we beat the Patriots, we beat the Chargers, we beat the Commanders, we beat the Bears, we beat the Colts, we beat the Titans. We lose to the Chiefs, right? Let's just say it's a game where you're going to the Chiefs. You play the Jags, you beat them, the Denver Broncos. We'll give that to the Broncos because it's at the Denver Broncos. Cowboys is at home. The Browns are at home. Those are winnable games, right? Chargers, this one's for them. We'll let them have the win. We'll let the Eagles have the win. We'll let the Texans have the win. You can finish like a legit 11-6, 12-5, right? The Raiders could legitly win a ton of games this season. Our schedule's a lot easier this season than it's been in the past. And I also think we're at an interesting point in the NFL where teams have invested in quarterbacks and they want to see what these quarterbacks can actually do, right? We have a lot of young quarterbacks in the NFL. Like literally every team we play this year has, outside of the Chargers, the Chiefs, the Eagles, most of these teams have like first or second year quarterbacks. the Patriots, the Commanders, the Bears, the Titans. The Titans will have a rookie, obviously the Colts third-year quarterback, but Anthony Richardson missed most of his rookie season, so he's really a second-year quarterback at this point. The Broncos, I don't even know who the quarterback's going to be for the Cowboys when that game comes around. It could be Dak, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's someone else, right? Like Joe Milton, to me, could easily take over for the Cowboys if Dak Prescott struggles. The Cleveland Browns will probably have a rookie, right? They'll probably have one of their two rookies in at that point. The Texans have Stroud. Stroud's a good quarterback, but they even like the Giants, right? So we're going to have some favorable matchups, right? Because there's a lot of young quarterbacks. And I do hope that Pete Carroll and Patrick Graham can scheme it up, understanding that this schedule is going to be a lot easier than probably next year's schedule, right? And I hope that the Raiders can kind of take that leap that we saw with the Washington Commanders last season, right? They were the second worst team from a record perspective 2 years ago, and they're in they're in a championship round literally off season later, right? I don't see the Raiders being that much different than where the Commanders were. Right, we've revamped that offensive line. We put those investments in by bringing back Adam Butler and Koonce on the defensive line. We've let some of the guys go that, from a contract perspective, they're going to get paid, right? Which I think made a ton of sense. You replace those guys, but let's see if those replacements can kind of step up. And then let's see if Geno Smith can kind of do what he did in the past. And if Chip Kelly can make this offense go, right? We'll see what ends up happening. I want to know what you guys think, man. How many games do you guys think the Raiders can win with this schedule? Do you guys think it's favorable or do you guys think it's unfavorable for the Raiders? There's definitely parts, in my opinion, that are favorable and unfavorable, but generally speaking, it's the NFL, man. It's what you're going to get, right? Some teams will have a harder schedule than others. From a miles perspective, we're right in the middle, right? 18,000 miles. The Chargers, for example, travel the most, 37,000 miles. Someone did say that that's probably because they have some overseas international games. That makes sense as well, but that travel still sucks, right? That's going to mess up your entire schedule for going into that week and then even the week after. And if you have two international games, which I think the Chargers might, that puts them at a huge disadvantage, right? Let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.